Welcome to Film Fritter, where we chart stories while drinking quality brews. My name is Rachel Masters, and today we are going to be charting the power of the dog, and there will be spoilers. Here's how my video and rating system works. I chart stories by ranking every scene with a quality level. I give a final rating based on the majority scene quality the film or series episode achieves in a particular category. There are also extra points for storytelling elements that can affect the final score afterwards. Today we are going to be going over story structure and character development. Then I will talk about how effective I thought the film was as a whole in driving home the theme. Let's get started. So the film is divided by the storytellers into 5 separate parts. There are 16 turning point scenes in total that I've identified. Turning point is when the story literally takes a different turn based on the actions of a character or the external environment around them. Part 1 is the exposition of the film, and it establishes the 5 central characters. Phil and George and their occupation, the off-screen mentor who taught them the business, the lovely Rose, a restaurant owner, and her son, the sensitive and artistic Peter. Phil's personality traits and his effect on the people around him is established in this first part. Within part 1, there's only one turning point scene, which I would consider the first half of the inciting incident. Phil's verbal abuse of Peter in the restaurant, making fun of his art, lays the groundwork for his eventual demise and causes a reaction in his mother, which George notices, and that establishes a connection. I'm not really impressed by what I'm seeing so far in this first section of the film. It's well made but very slow, with a horrible abusive person driving most of the action, which are some pretty awkward scenes, and if the story didn't have critical acclaim beforehand, I probably would not have finished the film. I felt uncomfortable, didn't really quite know what to expect, and I didn't really want to stick around to find out. However, I am glad that I did. I rated this section intriguing for that reason, and a basic point at the beginning because I felt like there was a few clunky lines of exposition about Bronco Henry and the anniversary of him teaching them the ranching business.
How many years since we took over the ranch?
25 years since our first run together.
25 years ago, where were you, Georgie boy? People helped you, fatso. One person in particular taught you and me ranching, so we damn well succeeded.
Maybe that's too harsh, let me know in the comments below. But I would challenge you and ask this question. Was there a more creative way of letting the audience know about this off-screen character, Bronco Henry, and his influence on Phil? Maybe a dramatized scene of sorts? Or would that have tilted sympathy in Phil's favor with the audience? Is it better to keep Bronco Henry an off-screen mythical figure? Part 2 is the shortest section of the film, which completes the inciting incident with one turning point scene. Phil attempts to prevent the marriage of George and Rose, but is not successful. George reveals this in a marvelous scene. Benedict Cumberbatch's acting in this was phenomenal, and gets 2+ worthy points.
Come again.
We're married someday.
The section ends with a horrific treatment of the horse when Phil enacts and releases his rage about the situation and his loss of control in his brother's life. So here we have the more obvious inciting incident hitting around the 30-minute mark. Now, if you go with Phil's treatment of Peter and the subsequent reaction of Rose and George noticing and creating that connection with her, we could say that the inciting incident happened around the 15-minute mark, but the more obvious one I would say happens around the 30 mark. In Robert McKee's book story, he says that the general principle is to keep the inciting incident within the first 30 minutes. Anything beyond the 15-minute mark, you are risking the boredom of the audience. So that's another thing I would ask the audience. What do you think is a realistic time period? What's too slow? Give me your thoughts. Part 3 shows the new normals for all the characters and has 3 turning point scenes. George and Rose are happy newlyweds, but not for long. Phil has decided to torment his new sister-in-law by targeting her deep insecurities in a kind of psychological warfare, such as the piano practice and then the party in which a well-meaning but unaware George puts Rose on the spot, and she is humiliated when she's too fearful to perform.
I can't seem to play.
In front of the governor, no less. I kind of relate to this. I used to play piano. Whenever your family tries to put you on the spot to perform for guests that are over, you're kind of like, no, please, God, no. Phil comes in and then makes it worse by delivering this zinger.
You didn't play? You wouldn't think there's much difference between a cinema pit and a dinner party.
Ouch. This section also shows Phil's odd habit of not bathing and reveling in his own filth.
But I stink. I like it.
He's also revealed to have been a well-educated person who's quite talented instrumentally, who chooses grunt work and dirt over refinery to an extreme degree. Part 4 starts around the halfway mark into the movie. What was set into motion in the final turning point of Part 3 manifests itself here in the first 2 scenes of Part 4, which are both turning point scenes. Peter arriving at the ranch for his summer break, and Rose using alcohol to calm her nerves, and she ends up falling into the deep end of substance abuse. Now, I rated this second turning point basic due to the fact that I felt that it wasn't quite enough to just show one horrific incident at this party to excuse her going full on into alcoholism, especially when it's mentioned in the film.
She never used to drink.
Oh, didn't you know?
No.
That she was before a teetotaler who never drank ever. I feel like I needed 2 to 3 more examples of Phil interfering with her daily life. Would have been interesting if they had added some incidents of Phil like destroying her garden or further interrupting her daily activities. So I'm marking this one as -1 points in basic for being a bit underdeveloped. You may think that it was enough, but let me know in the comments below. Make a case for it. What do you think? This is also when the film delves a little bit more into Peter's character, establishing him as a kind but driven and clinical character who can somehow dissect furry cuteness and not feel bad about it. At first I was like, are you normal? And then I thought, yeah, you have to dissect people, so a rabbit shouldn't be that much worse. For some reason it almost feels worse. Then we have a second turning point scene in which naked cowboys are naked. And there was that scene, whatever that was. Essentially, it's revealing that Bronco Henry was a little bit more than a mentor. But the most important turning point scene is when Peter finds Phil's porn stash, revealing his true sexual nature, and he decides to use this against him in a pretty devious way. Then we also get this cryptic and vague scene.
Are not unreachable. Unreachable.
Let me know what you thought that line meant. I was assuming that she was suicidal. So then Phil decides, contrary to his norm, to become Peter's friend and mentor. And later, after watching the whole film, you can see how Peter carefully cultivated this entire relationship. We then see what we eventually find out is the murder weapon being acquired. This gets an extra point for being a pretty clever way of hiding a twist right in plain sight. Rose then sells the hides and prompts a pretty explosive reaction from Phil. Very well acted scene, again, by Benedict. Then, and again, a very genuinely acted scene, Peter offers the hides to Phil to replace the ones that Rose sold. Now, he usually burned these anyway just to spite the people who wanted them, but in this case, he actually wanted to keep the hides in order to finish this rope that he was weaving as a gift for Peter. The climax happens in a rope weaving scene in the barn, which I don't know about you, but I was on the edge of my seat. I had no idea what was going to happen here. Anything and everything could have taken place. It was truly the point of greatest tension in this film, and even without the twist, it was still pretty freaking tense. +2 worthy points. Phil then mysteriously dies, and everyone's lives end up getting better because of it. Pretty sad. Also, kind of a question is how they let him have so much power over them. Does that say more about him or them? Then, in a twist and final turning point, Peter is revealed to be Phil's killer. It was anthrax on the cowhide. That was good. And the title of the film finally earns its place. Delving into the theme. Just because someone doesn't look threatening doesn't mean that they aren't in fact very deadly. The very thing that Phil was attempting to overcompensate for was what led to his eventual demise. Poetic justice. Is this type of cruelty rooted in self-image? In fact, Phil didn't actually seem to be repressing anything. He seemed fully self-aware of his own sexuality. He was just hiding it from everyone. The story actually seems to be more of idolatry and obsession. Bronco Henry was his lover and his idol, and he strove to be like this ideal to the utmost extreme. Bullies that are adults tend to mask their cruelty behind something. In this case, Phil masked his torture of the people around him, but specifically the men in his life, by holding them up to a strict code of conduct that he thinks real men should adhere to. But in reality, he just seems like a sadist to me. Abusers beget abuse in others, and it seems that Bronco Henry has definitely unlocked the worst in Phil. Now, it's been mentioned in certain articles in the film journalism criticism circles online that this film was meant to deconstruct the myth of the American cowboy. I don't think it succeeded if that was the point. And in my opinion, the authors of those articles had a very limited view of what Westerns as a genre have to offer in terms of male characters. If that was the case, and I'm not saying that it is, but what supposedly is the myth of the cowboy character? First, I think we need to separate genre and character archetypes within the Western. Now, The Big Country actually did a better job than this film at confronting the bullying found in the cowboy occupation specifically. Funny thing is, it was more of a city versus country person comparison going on. And the film, I think, definitely examines different versions of a man and what masculinity actually means. And I think that Gregory Peck's character is that example of a gentleman, of the gentility of a man. And then you have Charlton Heston, who's kind of in the middle, who's that rough and tumble guy. But once you get past the underlying reasons for him disliking him, he's not a bad guy, he's an honorable person. And you have Chuck Connors, which exemplifies true toxic masculinity. So you have all three examples. Chuck Connors' character in this movie is very similar to Phil's character. Even though he is not hiding his sexuality, he is straight. Burl Ives plays his father in this same film, and it's an incredibly complex portrayal of a father who is a flawed but honorable man who must confront the toxicity of his son that came about from a culture that he helped perpetuate. And I would definitely recommend watching that movie. And The Power of the Dog kind of does that in the same way with Phil, George, and Peter. George exemplifies that quiet, firm type. He never really seems to give in to Phil. He just quietly reminds him or talks to him about the things that he sees that he's doing. Ultimately, this toxic culture that's addressed in this film was invented by bullies, and the purity of masculinity is just a face that they put on it. The final tally consists of 40 worthy scenes, 25 intriguing scenes, and 4 basic scenes. The bonus points being 2 worthy points for Benedict's performance, 2 worthy points for Kirsten's performance, acquiring the murder weapon in a sneaky way, and the climax is worth 2 worthy points. The negative points being 1 for underdeveloped motivation for a character's extreme action, and 1 negative point for clunky expositional dialogue in place of a dramatized scene. And again, you can challenge me on that. Come at me. Negative points are always subtracted from the highest point value. So negative 2 worthy points, which leaves us with 4 worthy points and 1 intriguing point. These points then get added as whole percentage points, subtracted from the lowest rank. So 5 percentage points get taken from basic, 4 are added to worthy, and 1 is added to intriguing. And the final rating is worthy. And if you finally made it this far, we have a beer tasting, which I had filmed earlier this week. Western Romance, Prickly Pear Plum Sour by Junkyard Brewing Company. Hopefully I won't drip it all over my nice setup. Interesting color. Let's see. I don't really like sours usually. Ooh. That is sour, but not bad flavor. It's actually pretty decent. Something floating in there. I think that's a piece of lavender from my bookshelf.